Hi, Evan. Good to have you here. Thanks for coming on to my channel.
Wow, you're so good at pretending to do intros.
Yeah, I'm pretending. Yeah, so we've been practicing the intro here, and let's just get started. The blasts.
So for everyone watching, like we were just bullshitting around, and then she just suddenly goes, "So hello, Evan. Welcome to my channel."
Demon play right there. Okay, so this time you are actually gonna share a different type than you did in your last interview. The
Oh no,
Kendrick
you're
one.
gonna bring that up.
I'm gonna bring that up.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
what type are you really? Because at the Kendrick interview, you said you were an ESTP, right?
Yeah. So I'm actually double feminine, TISE, CPSB. But when I first got my email, I read it as SETI for some reason. And so for 2 weeks, I thought I was an ESTP. And I read I read like both of Lewis Howes' books, because that would have been my type twin. I looked up about Michael Phelps, and I watched all the YouTubers of that type. And I was like, okay, I see the demon NI. I definitely see the demon NI. But in Lewis Howes' books, he would mention things like, once you've narrowed down in your pathway, you just go out and like approach people for these business opportunities. And I was like, okay, can you like go into that? Because that's what I don't know. Like, why did you skip that over? Like, and I thought I must be totally fucked. I was like, how am I a double decider, but I'm still struggling with like approaching the people, and clearly he didn't. And then there was the whole like demon and I is supposed to be real bad at connecting dots, but I was like noticing other people can't connect dots, and I'm like, I'm connecting these dots fine. Like, I don't get what the issue is. And then later on, turns out I'm actually the ISTP. So it makes total sense. The people thing is a bigger problem, and connecting the dots, knowing my path is not so much a trouble. So then I messaged, because I did an interview with Kendrick as an ESTP. And I messaged him. I was like, oh, hey, sorry, I'm actually this type. And he just put it in the description or something. But
Yeah,
now it's therefore, I guess, scientific purposes, here's the fuck up that my type can possibly do. But
yeah, right. We can blame the feminine sensory. Everyone else seems to do
yeah,
that. So
yeah. I actually, that was the one thing that I really got wrong, was I got my animals all right, but I thought I was something like audio INTP, and I thought the reason I'm so into the workout stuff was the masculine S. And
right.
because I was like, well, I know I make that kind of mistake where I misread things all the time. And so I was like, okay, surely that's like demon S. And so the biggest thing for me when I got my type back was, oh, feminine S must be really, really shit. And it was just processing that from then on.
Yeah. So you had to kind of reprocess everything once you checked your email again and saw that you were an ISTP and not an ESTP.
Yeah.
Or
It was
how
pretty
did you
cool though.
actually find out? Like, how did you realize that you were an ISTP? Like, did you
Oh,
read
because when
people?
I joined the Discord server, you know how you're supposed to send Ryan an email to prove your type?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I just told him like, hey, I'm like an ESTP, I want to join the Discord server, blah blah blah. And then I checked my email. I was like, oh hey, so actually here's what happened.
How did that affect you? Because for me, I think I'd have a freak out. But again, I'm an observer, so
Nah, it just answered a lot of questions, because I was like, oh, that makes a lot more sense. Like, because I know my whole life, my main problem was people issues.
mm,
And so to be a double decider ESTP was a bit strange. And like I didn't think my N was like that terrible. And so I was like, oh well, masculine N must be really good, and
mm.
feminine S must be really crap if I've got it first. And like, I read my thing wrong. And but I'm actually
Yeah.
double observer. It makes way more sense. And I was like, oh, it works a lot better now. Okay.
Great. So yeah, let's get into that. Because what you say is that as an IP, you have people problems instead of problems with things, freakouts about the things. What does that mean, like in reality? What does that look like? Because I find that the IPs are very good at covering up for that somehow. Like it's hard to tell if they are an observer or a decider because they seem to be hiding somehow, not showing that they have people problems. So what does it look like from the inside, from an IP's perspective?
I just don't know what to do in social situations, like at the start you kind of like gave some introduction. You did 3 introductions and I was like, oh wait, I don't know how to respond. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of situations like that. And I remember when I was a kid, I was just like, I'd see other kids approach each other and I'm like, oh, how do they know what to do? Because I'd go up and be like, hey, do you want to just like play this thing? Like, and sometimes it would like be like, oh yeah, sure. And sometimes they're like, nah. And I'd be like, oh, why is that? Like, why did that guy want to play and that guy didn't want to play? Like, and so it feels very unpredictable. And even still, like as an adult, I've had a lot of practice, but I'll go to like a bar or something and I'm like, oh shit, like in a bar, there's like a set of rules that you kind of follow. Like there's no line for buying drinks. Like, how does this work? Like you kind of walk up there and it's like whoever's the most fucking dominant guy pushes to the front and then the waiter serves them. And I'm like, okay, is it different for every bar? Am I supposed to shove my way in there? Do I be like a total douche like all these other guys? Or do I just kind of wait and actually the bartender's keeping track of who came in what order? I've got no clue.
Yeah, right. So yeah, because the tribe function is at the very bottom. So that makes perfect sense. So how does like OP help you in terms of resolving those kind of issues?
So I can go and talk to other people with different functions and I'm like watching what they're doing. So I'll be like, okay, this person's FE. I'm going to watch them and see like, okay, this person will say something to them. How are they responding? And it kind of builds up this like database in my head of like possible ways to respond in different situations.
So the whole thing becomes more predictable instead of totally unpredictable.
Yes. Because like you just see the same things happen over and over and over, and then you just be like, oh, okay, like that's the pattern, and then off you go.
Yeah, because your pattern recognition, your NI is third, but it's masculine, so it should be pretty strong to you, like you're aware of it.
Yeah. Now that I know, like I really looked into NIFE and I watched like, the Darren Brown typing thing and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. So all they're doing is noticing repeating patterns with people over and over and over. And once I sort of knew that, I was seeing patterns in real life, but I wasn't sure whether or not to believe the patterns or whether I was being too biased. So I'm like, okay, I'm sure this person's like doing this, this, and this. But am I just like making myself see that because it's like my shadow or something? And so now I'm just like, okay, I know when someone like, for example, on the day of having to meet them, they're not replying to your messages on the day. That usually means they're bailing. For example, they're going to bail on the meetup. If people are going to reply to you on the day of meeting, it usually means they're not going to bail in general, right? It's not always. Sometimes someone will have an individual pattern, like it'll be like outliers. So you got to notice like individual patterns and then general patterns. But in general, it's usually a safe pattern to go with. Like,
right.
If someone hasn't replied and it's like you're supposed to like, that they have to leave soon and they haven't replied, then you start being like, yeah, maybe I make other plans now and not wait until like 1 hour later and then no, I've got no plan,
Right, exactly. Do you even like when you say make other plans, do you make other plans for self or do you reach out to someone else just, to have a backup plan? Like if
Could
you
be
met a
both. Could
friend.
be both. So it could have been like, oh, well, I could have made a plan with another friend, but now they've gone and made plans and they're like somewhere else with someone, or they've gone on a date or whatever.
Mm,
And now I can't make plans because I turn down people, like, because I totally have friends.
mm.
Like, you're supposed to laugh at the IP peacocking friends. But
No.
no,
Am I
not funny. Okay.
smiling?
I don't know. So yeah. So yeah, I know. It's just like I could have done stuff, but here I was getting ready for that and then didn't go. But it's like the pattern was there. Like this person didn't reply, and I know when they don't reply, I could have just like made other plans, you know.
Right. Yeah.
And now that I know what NI is, I know to trust those things, because I'll get like a feeling in my body too, like, oh, I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. I know this is going to happen. But I'm usually just like, maybe that's just like, because I always had this thing about not trusting feelings.
Mm,
So I was like, this is how I feel about the situation. It might not be actually what happens in reality. And so I'll just be like, let's wait and see. And then like, damn it, I should have trusted that like instinct.
right. And maybe
But now
that's,
that I know,
yeah.
now I just trust it brutally. I'm just like, oh, this person, it's my first meeting with them. They arrived 15 minutes late. I know they're going to be 15 minutes late every time.
Mm,
In fact, it's probably going to be 15 and then later will be 20, 30. Like people don't generally get better. They get worse over time.
yeah, right.
So like, yeah. So I apply it everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah, that's very interesting. Like that's an excellent example also of double observing, because you are kind of weighing the two against each other. Like, oh yeah, the NI pattern, but then again, like this could happen. But what do I have? What are my options out there? Like you have the SE options. You can look for SE to fill like the void of the first SE that should have been there. And then you kind of wait until the last minute. You're still obligated to take in the reality first before you make your decision, but you're aware of the pattern, and that this possibility is there. This can happen. And you sound very calm when you're talking about this. Like for me, if I compare that kind of situation, it's more like with the OI, I'm going all in on this one thing, like this one plan. So what I have learned, like in more recent years, is that, oh, maybe I should have like a plan B, plan C, plan D, or options, looking for SE options in case this fails. And it's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. I'm not being, less trustworthy or something like that. I'm not planning to
Yeah.
bail, but I have like this other option to fall back on in case I need it. So yeah, I just learn from your double observing there.
Yeah, sometimes I don't even, like, if I've got a plan, it's not that I planned plan B, plan C or whatever. It's more like I'm aware that if this doesn't work, I can do that and I can do that. So I'm not worried if the plan fails.
Exactly. Yeah. And I'm not ranking them like this is B, C, D, like in that order, but looking at the possibilities, there is a B option, a C, and a D. But then you will pick the one that is more convenient at the moment, like whatever.
It's kind of like, it's like the taste thing you mentioned earlier, like you lost the taste during COVID. I was like, okay, how can I take advantage of this opportunity? Well, okay, I can't taste anything. I can eat all the yuck foods that are actually real healthy. And I know there's no point eating these like really delicious foods that are like real bad for you. So I just won't eat it. So if I think about it like that, I'm like, okay, cool. I'm not upset about missing out on this good opportunity because now I've got this other good opportunity.
Exactly. Yeah, you move things around. You can move both the SE and you can move the FE, like how you feel towards it as well.
Yeah. And lockdown as well. I remember when we went into lockdown here, so many people were freaking out. I was just like, well, what's the problem? Like, you can just do something else. I did 2 weeks quarantine when I came back from Taiwan, and everyone's like, oh, the quarantine, it's too long. It's going to be the most painful process ever. I was like, no, I'll just work out and read books.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
Someone's cooking my food for me. That's fucking great.
Yeah, because we can change the SF for ourselves, like, and for others as well, because those are the extroverted functions. So we're not tied to like a personal sensory, for example. It doesn't have to be this. It can be this or that, you know. There are so many options. You can fill one thing with something else if yeah, if
Yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah,
needed.
yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. So we can basically always make it cozy for ourselves and for others, regardless of the situation. That's the beta quadra strength, maybe. What do you think?
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty flexible on that. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. Okay, so I'm curious, what do you do for a living? What kind of path have you chosen in life so far? Because you are in your 30s or something, I think you mentioned.
Yeah, yeah. So that's kind of complicated. So I used to be an English teacher. I used to teach English to like Asian people.
Mhm.
That kind of started because I was learning Korean, and as I got real good at Korean, people started asking me to tutor them, and so I was like, okay, I'll just do that then. And
Right.
over time, though, I'd started to hate it, and so it was like a lot of I feel like I was actually doing demons really because I had to blast, I had to teach people things, I had to really plan ahead and be like, okay, like this person's scheduled here. I need to make this kind of lesson for them. This thing's here. I need to make that lesson for them, and I had to make it specific to them.
Mhm.
And so the real draining part though was not the planning. It was I have to sit for an hour and a half in front of this person and have like usually a very boring conversation because they can't really speak good English. And
Yeah.
it was the combination of I can't move around as well as like, oh my God, this is so boring. Like I want to talk about something kind of intellectual, but
Yeah.
I'm teaching them how to say like the cat was
Mhm.
hungry and it decided to like it can't even be that complicated sometimes. Like
Yeah. It's like teaching really small children in a way.
yeah, so I'd come home and be like, oh my God, that was a shocker. And now I've got a plan for the next one. And so
Yeah.
how can I make this more interesting? And so, yeah, I did it for quite a long time. But one day, like it was actually during lockdown, I had to do it online, which was even worse because like now I don't even get to drive to their house. I just have to,
Oh, no SE at all,
yeah,
basically.
do it online. I was like, oh my God, this is so shit.
Mhm.
So I decided on that day, like, okay, only outdoor work for some period of time. And so I ended up just getting a job in some other town working on an orchard. And that was okay because it was just, the job was real shit. Like it was just repetitive. Like, for example, you've got this massive line of trees and
Mhm.
they might say, today we're tying string from the bottom of the fence to the top. And so you'd
Ooh.
have to like, you'd tie some string, you put the ladder there, you climb up the ladder, put the string up, climb down, move the ladder, and then repeat all day for 10 hours.
Yeah.
And it was insanely boring, but they let us listen to music. So
Cool.
I was listening to audiobooks like all day for that most of that time. Sometimes I was talking on Discord to people.
Right. Yeah. So
Yeah.
you were basically doing your savior then, your double activated
Yeah,
consumer.
that it was nice. It was nice. I got to do my saviors at work.
Mhm.
Um, and then but that got real boring. So eventually came back and now I work doing this is probably the favorite job that I've ever had. I take care of the public parks and reserves.
Mhm.
So the job is basically I work with one other dude in a truck and then we drive to a location, we get out, we look around. It's very SE. Just look around and be like, okay, this needs fixing, we need to do this, we need to pick up the rubbish, and then we just do it. And sometimes not much needs to be done. Like sometimes we'll just be walking this long as bushwalk, which is
Mm.
we call the bush like forest. So it'd be like a walk through the forest,
Mhm.
and we're supposed to cut like overhanging branches, but sometimes there's not really any overhanging branches.
Mm.
So we're just walking around looking for like pest plants because there's some plants that we call pest plants that have to be removed because they
Mhm.
spread too quickly and they suppress the growth of other plants.
Right.
And some of them cause like asthma and stuff. So if we see those, we remove them. And so it's just like a nice bush walk, and we pull out the plant and just throw it in the bush somewhere so no one can see. And then yeah, that's my job. And as far as my path forward, still working on that.
Yeah, right. But that's interesting. And also thank you for giving an excellent SE presentation of that. I could really visualize and see what you are doing. And yeah, there are no question marks about the what of your work. So yeah, that's an example
You're
of
welcome,
your,
you're welcome, you're welcome.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're walking, I was just thinking about that, walking through the forest seems very contemplative, like you almost get to think about the deeper things in life, or consume, or do you guys have discussions during your walks, or like what do
Sometimes
you do with your brain as you are walking?
I think about things a bit less these days, because I feel like I've kind of concluded on, I guess, like my worldview, which is kind of new. But so okay, so I decided I got into meditation like a year and a half ago, and I sort of figured out the solution to all my problems is
Wow.
meditation. And so I basically, these days I go to the Buddhist center and I learn the meditation from there. There's like 2 main meditations they teach. And
interesting. So
part of the
yeah.
part of the Buddhist teachings is like there's like, they call it the threefold path. So you've got your meditation, which increases your ability to like observe yourself and then control your choices. Because most people, they're not really choosing their choices, right? They're just like reacting to something. So they'll have a craving and they'll chase the craving. Or they'll be like scared of something, which is aversion, so they'll avoid it. So they think they're choosing because they're like, oh, I'm choosing the thing that I like, right? But actually they're not choosing what they like. They just have like a chemical reaction causing them to chase the stimulus, which is just the thing that gives them the most dopamine, right? Which is what it's how people get addicted to drugs. So you're basically learning, like, firstly to observe, and you should be able to observe, like, okay, I'm craving this thing and I get this thing and I eat it or whatever, and the satisfaction is very temporary, and then I'm craving it again, and actually because I acted on that craving, now the craving gets bigger because everything you cultivate will then grow. And so that applies to everything. So if you cultivate like feelings of hatred, it's easier to feel hatred next time. If you cultivate eating chocolate, it's easier to get the urge to eat chocolate next time. And it's really that simple.
Exercising your mind, sort of.
Yeah, those things are called unskillful actions, basically, is like craving and aversion, and like basically all the negative emotions. And the skillful ones are the ones harder to do. So it's harder to wish someone you dislike happiness, right? So
if you are a decider, maybe.
I don't know, it's just what they taught in the thing. I know it's true for me. So that one of the meditations they have is one where you're supposed to think of someone you feel friendly towards. It can't be romantic feelings towards them, because that's like a different thing. But you're supposed to feel like a genuine unconditional friendliness towards someone. And you kind of like, you're supposed to notice a feeling arises in the body when you think of that, and you focus on it. And sometimes you can increase it, sometimes like it's kind of hard to feel it at all. It just depends. But the idea of it is you feel the friendliness and you increase it. It's called the cultivating of loving kindness meditation. So you're cultivating it, and then because you've practiced feeling it, it's now more likely to feel it later, right? So it's easy to skillfully move yourself towards that than it was before. But anyway, then what you do is you practice thinking of like a person who you just met on the street, and you try to feel that towards them. And then it shouldn't be too hard because you already cultivated it. So now you're just switching the image. And then you think of someone who you dislike, and you have to try and keep the same feeling of like, oh, I feel friendliness towards them, and I wish them happiness, and they're free from suffering, etc., etc. And I feel like for me, it's helping to deal with my decider issues quite directly, like, because what I notice is when I dislike someone, really, it's like I think of them, I get this irritating feeling, I create this massive TI story of like why they're shit, and then the story creates more negative feelings, and then next thing you know, I'm like wreaking havoc inside my body because there's like cortisol and all these other negative neurochemicals, and
Right. That's a
now I
very
can shift
fascinating.
the experience. Like you can shift the experience, and by getting better and better at shifting your experience, that's why I guess meditation is helpful. Like,
Yeah, yeah. Wow, it's a
so
really fascinating approach and makes me think of, yeah, like the basic concept is that you are in control of your own mind. Like you
yeah,
don't just let things happen to you.
yeah, and the emotional state, which I
Mm,
think for me is especially big. And it's not just like, so they call it the threefold path because you've got the meditation, then you've got ethics, which is how you apply it in everyday life. Because you should also notice if you do the ethical, there's like basically some categories defined as the ethical actions. And when you do those, you should notice you feel good in your body. And when you perform negative actions, if you're observant, you should notice that you feel shit in your body, and that's your conscience.
mm,
And so basically by acting in the ethical way, you can enhance the cultivation of metta, which is the loving kindness sort of
yeah.
sensation you're trying to build. And supposedly, theoretically, you can build it up so big that you always feel pleasant.
Mm,
And so you're practicing your meditation to observe your negative patterns and learn to shift it at all times. So what I decided for my path forward is it doesn't matter necessarily what I'm doing, as long as while I'm doing it as like skillfully as possible. And by skillfully, I don't mean as skillful, like skillfully with your hands also counts because you have to like really focus
mm,
your mind to be skillful with your hands. But I'm also trying to do that internally with like, okay, as I'm doing this, am I feeling irritation towards that guy over there or whatever? Is my mind directing to some bullshit that happened last week
mm,
with some person? And I'll bring it back and be like, okay, focus on doing this thing. What do I like about this thing? Can I wish that person happiness? Can I be
mm,
generous to someone else? Because being generous will generate metta. And so as long as I have a job where I can remain mindful,
mm.
that is fine. So it's basically for me, it's ISTP jobs. So physical jobs like what I'm doing is perfect. Because
Yeah.
then you can be like real deliberate with your movements. It's nice if someone's not rushing you, so you can do it like real carefully. Like,
Mm,
and then I learned like, oh, in Zen monasteries, that's kind of what they do is they like will water the plants, for example, like as carefully as possible. And so
mm.
that's what I'm doing, like cutting the tree.
Everything is like very intentional.
Yeah, yeah. So I
That
feel
is,
like I'm actually working on masculine SE sometimes because I feel like masculine SE is like way more aware of their surroundings, whereas I'm not so much because I'll be planning something in my head. There'll be like a diagram or something. So
mm,
I'll be doing this thing and be like, okay, I'll do it mindfully because if I do it mindfully, I'm cultivating my focus. And if I cultivate my focus, I can then like change my internal state. But I'm seeing it as a diagram. Whoops, didn't pay attention to my surroundings.
mm,
So when you ask me like, what are you thinking about during your work? It's like, I'm trying not to think too much. I'm trying to be mindful, but I
mm,
keep falling into thinking about something. And if I'm not thinking about that, I'll be like, oh, which martial arts should I practice? Like, before that, it would have been before I concluded on this meditation thing, it would have been like I would have been reading research about meditation, and then in the meditation research paper, it would have said like, okay, this, and this effect was had on the brain, and so I'll be visualizing that. Like, how did that have the effect on the brain? What like neurotransmitters had to be churning? Like, what receptors were growing and decreasing? What part of the brain increased? And I'll see it visually,
mm.
and that will be very distracting from what I'm doing. And so,
Yeah.
yeah, now I'm trying not to do that. I'm just like, okay, I know what I'm doing. I've sort of like got myself on a path. I don't know the exact next step, but that's okay. Like it'll work out as long as I'm working on my concentration, because if someone works on their concentration, they're going to be better at anything no matter what they do. So it doesn't really matter what I do. I'll excel at it.
Right. Yeah. I have two follow-up questions on this then. So, first of all, is it painful to exercise that muscle of awareness controlling the mind, whatever you want to call that muscle.
I wouldn't call it painful. It's just like I don't know. It's like, you know, when you really want to eat something, I know you'll consume lust. You know, when you really want to blast and you have to suppress it, like you have to be quiet. You're not allowed to talk. Like, okay. Get in a group of people. So there's no rule that you can't blast, but you make your own rule that you can't blast, and try not to blast. It's probably like that kind of a feeling. Like, I wouldn't call it painful, but it's not easy.
Yeah, it's it's still suppressing something that is there. So you have the awareness of the want to do it, like it's there, and it's kind of also building up in a sense. So for example, this becomes a little bit nerdy and conceptual, but during my COVID now, I had to be in bed for about 2 weeks, and actually it wasn't that bad to be in bed. Like I actually enjoyed it in a way, because now I didn't have to do anything with the tribe or for the tribe. I could actually allow myself to tap into my DI fully. So I did a lot of consume and sleep. Like I consumed a couple of TV series, like all the seasons, and some movies, like the second
What did
week.
you watch? Did you watch
when I
Cobra
was
Kai?
No, I didn't.
Lame.
Yeah, I watched different things, like older shows that I have missed, like Perception, for example. I love that one. Oh, at least 2 or 3 more. I can't hardly remember them. The last one I watched about the founding of Spotify, it's called Playlist. Really good one if you haven't seen it. It's actually even Swedish, because here in Sweden, this whole Spotify was started. It's a guy called Daniel Ek who is the founder of Spotify. He was like 22 or something when he started this project. Yeah, so it's really cool. So that's like the story behind that, how it happened. So that was really cool and interesting, I thought. Yeah, let's not talk too much about it, because the main point here was that I felt that now I can tap into my DI, into my consume, into my sleep, and just do that. Like I almost only did that for 2 weeks. Like, sure, I did send a few text messages here and there, so I kind of blasted a bit, but / played, but very little compared to how much consume and sleep there was. But then in the end of it, like after 2 weeks, I really felt like I had this need to let the blast come out. So I spent this weekend being on Discord for quite a few hours, which I haven't done for a long time. But just I needed, because I could still not go out and meet my friends or do anything like in the physical world. So I did it on the internet instead. So I'm just thinking of that, like the need of doing something. Like you can hold yourself back, you can suppress it for a while, but then it doesn't exactly become painful, but something along those lines, like the need sort of builds up. Would you agree? Like if we apply this concept to the meditation?
Yeah, it can do. Especially if you're not meditating. That kind of, all you're doing is shifting things around. It's like with I read a book on addiction once, and a lot of addicts, what they'll do is they'll just quit one drug and replace it with another drug, and call it progress. But like actually, there's kind of like, I think the more you meditate, the less you get those urges. But at the same time, there's like, you learn about what the skillful actions are, and the antidote to those kind of like cravings that you get, because it really is a craving, right? It's like an urge, is to perform there's like an associated skillful action you can perform that kind of makes you forget about the craving. So I remember, like the only one I remember out of the list, I need to go back over it. The one I remember the most was like, people who have like strong sexual cravings usually feel this and this about themselves, and the solution to that is actually generosity. So you have to either think about doing something generous to someone, because that can evoke the same feeling, or actually perform something generous, which will then cause like a different physiological state to the standard like craving that was being generated by this coding in your brain.
So part of it, then part of that practice of meditation would also be to actually do stuff in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's very important. That's why I found these teachings very helpful, because before that I was just doing like meditation and then hoping that my daily life becomes better, and it did to some extent. Like I managed to destroy some habits, but some major issues still remained. It didn't really teach me how to live in everyday life as effectively as what I learned at the Buddhist center. So I don't know if other people reach the same epiphany, but like I just kind of, it seemed to click into my NT sleep pretty well.
Right.
And I saw my path forward as like, okay, I need to act in this way. And then actually now I'm not too worried about like, oh shit, what should I do for my career or whatever. I just know if you're acting in that way, and if you're practicing your concentration, just no matter what you fall into, will naturally you're going to excel at it, and people are going to like you, because if you're following those ethical things, then they are generally just good FE things.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, cool, that takes care of the demon function. Yeah.
That makes so much sense, actually. So that should also reduce things like anxiety, I'm guessing, quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because you don't really have a reason, so to speak. Like you don't have that buildup of anxiety if you learn to handle things.
Well, actually, the reason I got into the meditation, well, the reason I was researching it was because I kept feeling like I had this problem. Like apparently all of my type has it. Like, you know, if you watch the they've got a video on Austin Alexander.
Yeah.
He's like one of my type twins, and they say in that video they have like 100 of me in their docs, and they say that my type was always kind of like excelling until mid-20s, and then they crash. And so the crash was real interesting, because up until then I was able to push myself to do anything, and then suddenly I couldn't push myself to do everything. Every day I felt heavy. I felt like real depressed all the time, and I couldn't stop thinking about all these like negative situations that had happened, which was generating more like, I guess, negative emotions in my body. I didn't know what it was at the time. All I knew was like I was trying to do things and I couldn't. And I think a lot of people thought I was acting because I look really fit. So they're like, how are you so like tired all the time? I'm like, man, I can't explain this. I don't really know what's going on. But I eventually figured out that it was like built up emotions that I didn't know how to deal with. And I just had ignored, because I had this philosophy of like, oh, the emotions are just like a physiological response. They're not really real. They're just there to force me to do things that my body wants me to do. I can ignore it. And I thought like the waste product would eventually just be removed from the body. But what I didn't realize is the brain will keep generating those like negative emotions by me just constantly thinking about it, as well as like trauma gets stored in the body. So
yeah,
I keep getting like triggered by things. I keep getting upset by things. And I keep like, I'd be trying to move and do my work, and I'd be like, fuck, I can't move. Like, what's wrong? And then that caused me to explore these things. And through like ops and a bunch of other stuff, I started to figure out, okay, it must be emotions. And then so I started learning certain meditations, like more to deal with anxiety and stuff, where you focus in on the feeling. And I started noticing this weird heavy feeling will turn into some like sadness or something. And then so in that way, I could like just feel it and process it and kind of understand what it is. And that's when I realized like, okay, for me to do meditation is that's the only path forward where I'm not going to be totally fucked, basically. So I know that's why I can take it so seriously. I do it every day, sometimes twice.
Yeah,
and what makes me able to stick to it, because it's not like it's easy to do. Like I get up at 3:30 in the morning to do it, except today I have to do it after work because of you.
Oh, yeah. What time
Yeah,
is it
yeah,
over there? Because you are in New Zealand
yeah,
and I'm in Sweden. So what time is it over
yeah.
there?
Now 5:09 a.m.
So yeah,
I woke up 3:45.
so crazy.
Three
Or
forty
I
five,
mean,
and I'll just move it. I'll move my meditation to after work. Because
right.
I think that's SF play. I'm like real flexible if it's playtime. As long as I do it, it's okay.
Yeah.
Like
Okay.
it's not when I do it. It's like, okay, I know I will do my meditation when I come home from work. But
Okay.
playtime, I'm gonna move my schedule. But yeah,
Like
so
playing 4 in the morning isn't really fun to me, but I think that's awesome that you
yeah,
can
but I
see it
already
that
have that
way.
habit of getting up at that time, so it's not like a huge difference.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because like what would have happened is like if I meditated in the morning and we made the plan to do this after work,
Hmm.
I'm still gonna like my day's still finished at the same time, right? Like
Yeah,
all I did was
exactly. Yeah.
move things around. So
Yeah.
yeah, what were we
Yeah.
talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
I'm
I take it very seriously. I take it very seriously, these
mhm.
meditation things and a lot of other NF things like I kind of dove into, especially after doing ops. I was like, oh cool, like I'm just gonna not, I made this rule where if someone says something totally woo-woo, I'm not allowed to discount it. I will just like sort of explore it anyway.
Oh, that's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah,
Tell me more about that, like exploring something that actually in a way triggers you.
yeah, I wouldn't say it triggers me anymore. It used to really trigger me.
Yeah.
Um, like if someone mentioned to me meditation and Buddhism way back in my teens, I would have thought like, oh yeah, that's like a cool idea and everything, but
Mhm.
like I know that it's like, what does it do? Like it just seems like some bullshit. What am I trying to cultivate psychic powers or something?
Mm.
But then I started seeing research on ST, like ST research about how it like affects your brain and stuff. I'm like, oh, okay, I see how meditation like actually grounded in some kind of reality. But then other people would bring in other like, you get other people in the spiritual communities talking about things like the astral plane and like astrology and all these other things.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
used to think that was like ridiculous, but then I started seeing like, oh, people into astrology are also into these things. Sorry, people into meditation also tend to be into these things.
Okay. Yeah.
and
Right.
and part of what got me into meditation was I started seeing research on people able to control their placebo effect.
Mm.
So one example would be like there's a lot of research to show if you imagine working out, you actually get a strength increase over time and muscle increase and
Wow.
skill increase. So you can just visualize working out and you get results. It's
So
not as good as like actually working out, but it's still some result, which is more than like what I expected. And so I'm like,
that's so
okay,
cool. Yeah.
yogis and monks been saying this for years, and I always just thought it was bullshit. But now it's proven. I wonder what else they're saying is true. And some of them also say like, yeah, the planets definitely affect you. So I'm like, I don't know how it affects you, but like they said these other things which are now proven true. I wonder if they'll be proven true in the future. So now I'm just like, okay, like I'll withhold my disbelief. It's
Mm.
not that I believe it or disbelieve it, but before I would have been like, that's a load of bullshit.
Right. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now I'm just like, okay, yeah, I'll entertain that idea. I'll read about it. It's fun.
Yeah. So there is like more openness and a calm attitude about taking in things or letting them be what they are and just see what comes
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, I'm just processing all of this because it's super interesting. And yet, just like a little bit of a tangent on the part you said that working out mentally, like working out in your head, like exercising, like at the gym, I suppose you're kind of visualizing doing that, then that's what you're saying would help you to actually improve
Yeah.
physically.
So they had
So
like three groups.
what would
Yeah.
that look like? Like really short SE example of what could that look like? That kind of.
Okay, the literal experiment was like they had someone do bicep curls and
Mhm.
I can't that for some amount of weight for some amount of time. I can't remember the weight all the time, but I remember they had someone actually lifting weights and then they had someone just imagine that they're lifting the weights.
Mm-hmm.
And then they
Also
had another group.
for like how long? Because did they have to
I
do
can't
it
remember how
for
long.
like if they did it for 1 minute or 40 minutes, like or
This
an
was all
hour?
explained. This was all explained in the paper.
Yeah. Okay.
I just can't because that's I guess that's feminine sensory. I can't remember
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
the numbers. I just remember the whole overall concept.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
So
really cool. I will definitely look into that. Maybe you have
I
a
remember
website.
though, the people lifting the weights increased in size and strength by 60%. The ones who visualized, it was the ones who just only imagined lifting the weights, they increased by 30%.
Yeah.
And then the control group who did nothing, they had no effect, obviously. Yeah. And
yeah, so the placebo effect is real even in that sense. Like we know that it's real in other
yeah,
areas,
except
like medically, for example.
placebo is like when someone, it's almost like when someone makes you visualize something and then you have the effect. So it's like when you thought you took some like painkiller pill, but actually didn't. You're like actually imagining that you took the painkiller pill, but someone triggered that imagination by giving you a fake pill. And so it's going to have the same effect as like,
Yeah.
I could know I'm not taking a pill, but I'm just going to keep imagining that I took it, and that should have the same effect as like the placebo. So you're either consciously utilizing it or you're tricked into utilizing it, one or the other.
That's funny. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And it turns out Michael Phelps, my almost twin, he visualizes his swim training. I think it was 2 hours. It was either 4 or 2 hours. He just imagines his swimming before he actually does his swimming, and he's got the most gold medals in like world history. So he's also tapped into the same skill of like visualizing to improve a skill over time, because you can't just like swim for 6 hours a day. You'll like, your body can't really handle it. But you can get extra training in by visualization. So he took advantage of the same thing. And also like recently the Alex Honnold video, he talked a lot about visualization too. So it seems to be like my area of type seems to tap into something with that.
Yeah, like the ultimate mind body control in a way.
I think it's because masculine, and we're always naturally going to visualize anyway, so we discover it, but like I think anyone can actually do it.
Yeah. I was thinking of, Wim Hof, but he's an IP, but he's an FI lead. So
yeah, same thing. He talks about it too. Like you do the breathing thing, then you imagine like the body is healing or something.
Yeah.
And he's done a lot of research on it.
Yeah, this is so cool. And I also remembered that just last night I had some pain and I was so tired in bed, I was going to sleep. And then I was thinking of, I have to wake up or, get out of bed and get that, painkiller. And I remember I thought about it like taking the pill. I knew what pill it is and I know how it feels when I take it, like after 20 minutes.
Yes.
And I was contemplating doing it for like 5 or 10 minutes. And I was kind of, in middle of dreamland and awareness and the balance between how much pain is there and how much do I need to, actually just relax and forget about the pain. Like, can I sleep with this pain? And as I was thinking about it, I actually did feel that now when you say it, like I did feel that it kind of slowly decreased. And then in the end of like the 5-10 minutes, I thought, okay, I don't need to go. So let's just fall asleep. And then I did.
Yeah, it's kind of like if you try to imagine being next to a fire, you can almost feel it, right?
Yeah.
So in the same way, you know what taking paracetamol feels like. So just do the same thing.
Yeah.
So imagine the feeling of paracetamol. If you do it long enough, should have something like the effect.
Yes. And that's what happened last night. So yeah, it does work. That's so cool.
Yeah.
I never thought of it that way.
You can apply it to everything.
Exactly. The NI concept can be applied over, a broad spectrum of things. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Okay. This is not time for me to sleep process. Let's go on with the interview. So,
just don't think of being sick, because then you'll feel sick, right? Like that's what happens when you watch like a movie, you see someone vomit and you're like, oh man, I want to vomit. Like, how does that happen? It's not like the bacteria went into me and made me sick. It's like, oh, actually I'm imagining vomiting, so I want to vomit. That's just called, the Buddhas would just call that unskillful use of like the mind. But if you can use it to cultivate love and kindness, for example, by thinking of someone you feel friendly towards, or even if you just remember the feeling, you just remember the feeling and generate it. You don't even need to visualize something, but that takes a little bit more skill. The visualization is just an aid to change your state.
Interesting.
Yeah. Sorry, what were you going to ask?
you know, I don't remember, but yeah, now we're jumping back here, but that is true. Like, so basically what we are doing by default, by nature, is that we are doing anti-meditation, or you are meditating on the wrong things, like you are making the bad things happen by worrying about them, like
You're
you're
not choosing.
increasing. Yeah.
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 It's your mind is being directed by outside stimulus, like,
Yeah.
oh, someone was vomiting. Oh shit, now I feel like vomiting. Like that's this TV show was directing my mind. Like when now what I need to do is direct my mind elsewhere. Um, or at
Yeah.
least choose what I'm consuming. Like don't give into the craving to consume that horror movie or whatever. Like,
Yeah, I'm not going to give any sensory, but I remember hearing about that with this Wim Hof guy. Like he was in the cold water for quite a while, but his
yeah.
body temperature didn't decrease. Like he managed to stay just by using his mental powers.
Yeah, absolutely possible. I think a lot of people like think it's a load of bullshit, but there's so much research on it now
Yeah.
that like when I read it, I was like, oh wow, there's like no reason to disbelieve this. But like
Yeah. Yeah.
most people are not even aware of the research, and some people are even told of the research and they still disbelieve it. And I'm like, yeah, but read the experiment. Like it's pretty clear.
Respect the consumer.
Yeah. And they just still don't want to believe it. I'm like, oh wow, some people are actually just like totally in denial of reality. Like,
Yeah, exactly. So basically, this is also a second tool, or maybe a first tool, the basic tool that you're using to tap into your functions. And it makes even more sense now that you have OP. You can even see how this helps you recognize more patterns and tap into that FE, like feeling positivity towards others.
yeah. So Darren Brown, for example, right? Like kind of ish your type, right?
Mm,
He's like triggering people to have these emotional experiences because he's taking control of their ability to use placebo, basically.
yeah.
So, like, just like I can control my inner state, there's a way you can, like, just like giving someone a pill and saying, hey, this is a painkiller, you can make them imagine the painkiller unconsciously, therefore the pain goes away. You can also make them have good feelings. And I think that's what he's doing in like a savior state. And you must be doing it too.
Yeah.
So I'm like, how can I take control of this? Like
Right.
I just don't know. I don't know the steps to cause a good emotional reaction in the other person. Like I'm just guessing, but like, and oftentimes it gets wrong.
Yeah, because
But
for me, I'm giving the imaginative painkillers to the tribe, but you're actually giving it to yourself.
yes, and I don't know how to give it to the tribe, but I wish I did, because when people are upset, I just get real awkward. I'm like, shit, I don't know what to do, don't know what to do, don't know what to do. And then I start panicking. And then because they're upset, I'm actually also FE, I'm getting upset too.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, crap, I don't want them to be upset. And in the past, before ops, what I did is I'd be like, I'd just be thinking, well, I wouldn't be upset at that. Why is that person upset at that? And I'd just be like, I don't see any reason for you to be upset. And that, of course, just make them more angry, right? I think what ops did was make me realize, like, okay, the only reason I don't have an emotional reaction to those things is because I'm an ISTP and I'm suppressing it, and I'm the best at suppressing it. Maybe the only rivals would be like the TEEJs would be like doing a similar thing. And Shane even said, like, she noticed it in her stomach when she hasn't been doing her FI. There's like a video that came out after they did one of her type twins. They said her type usually gets stomach cancer, and she can feel it in her stomach when she hasn't been like tapping into her emotions. So she's doing the same thing that I'm doing. And so I'm expecting everyone else to do it. And then I'm like, oh wait, okay, the emotions don't have to have like a logical reason. People are reacting to it. And I'm just like good at suppressing that reaction. And so now what I do is like that's what was making me sick and heavy all the time, was I was just suppressing too many emotions. And so I started noticing patterns. So like I started having, I had all these casual relationships, and if I ever stopped seeing a chick, I'd be like, okay, it's fine, whatever, I'll just go see other chicks. But I started noticing, like, it's always exactly 2 days after that I'll be really drained. And it took me a while to notice, like, oh, I think my body, like, because the human is an animal, I think my body got like a connection to the person, and now it's like grieving the loss of its partner or something. And I was like, oh, that seems to be happening every time. Oh crap. So that's why other people are getting upset when they have breakups, because I wouldn't get upset. I'd be like, oh cool, freedom, I can do whatever I want now. And I'd be trying to explain to my friends, like, hey, don't be upset, man. You can go on Tinder, you can get laid or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, but now I'm like, oh, they just don't have that ability to repress it. And the ability to repress it is definitely causing damage. So I'm just like telling future Evan to pay for it, right? And so now I'm like, okay, if I feel weird, like if I feel like something is off with my body and I'm feeling heavy, I'm getting like irritated really easily, I start thinking like, okay, did something happen to me recently that other people would be upset about and I didn't get upset about it? Because that's probably what's happening right now.
Yeah.
And that,
So,
I guess, helped me to respect other people's emotions. So now I just want to fix other people's emotions, but I don't know how to do it.
yeah, but learning about the ops code it's a good beginning right there. But yeah, so before you weren't expecting the emotional bills. So when they came with a mail, it was always like a
Yeah, I
surprise.
thought it didn't exist. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally thought, I believed it didn't exist.
Yeah, because they are as real as when I ignore the sensory, like the reality, then I have to pay in the sensory later.
Yeah.
That always happens to our demons, regardless of if it's intuition or feeling or whatever. You have to pay later. That's the tidal wave as well, right? So you have found a really helpful tool or two tools to kind of navigate your life and avoiding the worst kind of tidal waves. Do you still find that you every once in a while happen to get, like an NF tidal wave of some sort? And what would that look like?
Yeah, so I'll still have decider issues. So I'll be like irritated at some things that people are doing. But at the same time, I'm watching myself create this like story. And so there's some cases where I can divert my attention. And there's some cases where I'm not. And those cases where I can't, I just go, okay, I have to remove myself into a different scenario. Or I'm just going to generate the negative story and the negative chemicals. In the future, maybe I'll be more skilled to deal with it, but right now I'm not, so I'll remove it. But in some cases, I can be skilled.
And by removing, then you mean like a different physical environment or a different physical action?
Different physical environment and both.
Yeah, right. Well, also that's a way of snapping the brain out of it, like just changing the SE and the actions.
Yeah, because if I keep myself in that environment, I'm going to get more and more angry, and that anger is going to like cause me to. It's going to be very tempting to want to get back at that person, and then now we're having like a battle. And
so the recommendation you would give like to deciders who are stuck with people issues would be like go on a hike or just do something different or do something for someone or
yeah. Go to the Buddhist center and learn the loving kindness meditation. That is probably the most helpful, because then you can actually concretely realize like, oh, my like emotional state is controllable by me. It's not because of those people making me angry. That's just my lack of skill to control my own internal state.
Yeah.
And so now I can recognize, okay, it's like if I'm at the gym, it's like I know that weight's too heavy for me. I'm not going to lift it. I'm going to like go do a different exercise or something. If I'm in a situation which is equivalent to that weight, I'm going to be like, okay, later, one day I'll be strong enough to lift that weight. But for now, I'm gonna not go injure myself. So
yeah,
there's like a removal from the situation.
Yeah. I'm just curious, like you are an ISTP and it seems like your type has the ability to do almost anything like in the real world. Like you seem to be able to adapt and learn. And also you are a skip and they are called like super learners. So the consume play or the play consumes are the skips. And it seems like, because also looking at the classes, they always give an example of some, ISTP who navigated, like a pilot or something navigated and avoided a crash from happening, all kinds of very dramatic situations. They are able to resolve things, think fast in the moment, and just navigate well in the physical world. So basically the opportunities should be limitless in terms of like the SE world to be able
I
to
think that's
handle.
maybe an exaggeration.
Yeah, of course, but I'm just trying to, yeah.
Like I wish
So,
I could navigate all those physical things perfectly.
of
I
course you
think
can't right away, but I mean you can learn to. That's what
the
I'm.
potential is there. The potential is there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So like right now, like if your fridge is broken, I don't know how to fix it, right? Like
But you can find out how to fix it, and you can try in the
maybe I
eventually.
can.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I can make an attempt, but there's no guarantee. Like there's been things I've tried to fix and I haven't been able to fix it. It's just like too advanced. Like I need to actually go learn that thing for 3 years or something.
And then it's not worth it. So you will just leave the thing to someone who really has the education.
Yeah,
Or
there's only so much time in my life, right? So
yeah.
it's like, okay, like I talked to my type twin not long ago, and I seem to put my attention towards like biology, chemistry, psychology, but he put his towards computers and maths.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at maths and I'm not the best with computers.
Right.
But I know the potential's there because when I was younger, I did start to get pretty good at computer stuff. But then I directed all my attention towards like learning languages and stuff. And I found the computer was a distraction. So I deliberately like didn't have a computer. And so for 5 years, I didn't really use a computer. Then I was out of date, and then I couldn't be bothered like learning the new like user interface. And then so now I'm like lost when it comes to computers.
Yeah, so you found yourself on a different path because of that.
Yes.
So yeah, so how did you go about learning languages then without the screen? And
so first I did the consume and figured out the best way to learn the language. And then I found they're like, everyone has these different methods. So I looked up different polyglots on YouTube, and they all had their different opinions for like the best way to learn. And I found one guy's method, which I kind of adapted to myself. And it was very simple. It was just, I call it the discipline method. So some people, they're trying to watch movies to improve their language. I reckon that's bullshit. I reckon that's just like, you're trying to do something fun and use it as an excuse for study. What I actually did was I got my book and I was learning Korean. So each chapter starts with a monologue and 2 dialogues. Yes, a monologue and 2 dialogues. And then there will be a list of new words for each chapter. So all the words that appear in that story should be right here, as well as the new grammar structures. So I would read the story and be like, okay, that's a new word, like, and as I'm going through, I'm just learning the words as I go. So I'd like kind of read one sentence. Oh, I don't know that word. I'll go learn it. Then I'll start again. And I went through very slowly, constantly restarting every time I had to learn a new thing. Sometimes I had to sit for a while to try and understand, because like sometimes it's like the grammar structure can make sense, but when I actually read it in the context, I can't quite understand. And so I'll keep thinking about it and asking questions to my friends and like trying to play with it in my head until I can understand it completely. And after like, I had this rule, like 4 hours a day I have to study. So usually after 2 days for 4 hours a day, I would totally understand the full monologue and 2 dialogues. By the time you get to the later chapters, those are actually quite long. But if you've got 8 hours of solid study, you can get it done. And so then I understand it completely. If I've got any question about the understanding, I will not move on. I'll keep going and keep asking friends like, okay, am I understanding this right? Can I use the sentence in this way? Can I swap these words out? Will it work? And then even when I'm not studying, I'm thinking about it. I think that's the anti-sleep. I'm like, okay, if I say it like this, does it make sense? If I say it like this, does it make sense? If I want to say this, does that make any sense? Because I've always got ideas of what I want to tell to people. Like I had friends in Korea and I didn't have any like foreign teacher friends because I deliberately wanted to only study Korean. So while I was there, I was like, okay, I've got things I want to talk about. I learned this new grammar point. I can use that. And so I'm like, and then anyway, after I've understood all that completely, then I'll have the audio for that chapter and I'll go for a walk and just listen to the audio over and over and over. Because even though I understood it all, sometimes I would hear it, but they're talking too quickly for me to understand.
Yeah.
But like with focused listening, I could then be like, okay, I'm starting to catch it all. I'm starting to catch it all. And then I do that for 1 week. So for 1 week, I'm like focusing on one chapter's reading. And then I'll listen to the audio for like the last week's pages. So it's kind of like a review through the audio.
Yeah.
And then, because that for me was always the hardest, was actually the listening. So sometimes I'm talking to people and they're speaking too quickly. I couldn't pick up all the words, but when I'm reading, it's fine. And I think that's what a lot of people mess up. Because when I was teaching languages, I meet a lot of people who they're reading, they could understand what I'm typing, or they could understand what they're reading, but when I say it, they can't understand, and it's because they didn't practice the audio.
Yeah.
So even I could find like, okay, I just studied that whole chapter, I know all these words, but all I'm hearing is blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
And so I had to practice it until I could actually hear the words. And I think the mistake people are making with trying to learn through movies, maybe it's just me, but when I hear the movie, not only do I not know the words, but I can't like, it just sounds like that to me. You know, I'm just reading the English subtitles. I'm not learning anything. And so I kind of have to actively go through. I think it might be the intuitives are better at picking things up from movies.
What I do, so for me, when I learn languages, I need to be in the environment where they speak that language. So I have to put myself physically there. I will not sit and read like the way you explained. Sure, I can like take 1 or 2 basic courses in the language just to get the idea of the language, learning some basic words, get the basic structure of the grammar, so that I have the principles like in the back of my head. But then I need to go out there and I need to be exposed to it, and you know, a lot of repetition. And normally for an intuitive, everyday conversations are actually quite boring, to be honest. So people are talking about, you know, the normal stuff, you know, what weather it is, or what food you ate, or what you're going to eat, or, you know, if you're doing something with friends and family, and about the activities, you know, a lot about the physical world that I, as an intuitive, not necessarily care a lot about, but I still need it, you know, but, you know, my brain isn't focused on those things. But when I'm learning a language, suddenly I can use that, because now the sensory becomes more interesting to me, because I'm actually learning this new concept, like I'm cracking a code, because I see every language as a code. So now as I am learning the code of this language, suddenly the sensory like has an interesting context. And there is a lot of repetition in everyday life. People are doing the same things, they have the same routines, they talk about the same things, you know, they eat the same things, they do the same things, etc., which is perfect for learning. I don't mean to sound condescending or anything, but it's just from
No,
my
I see the same thing,
perspective.
definitely the same thing.
Yeah, right. So that's actually perfect, I think, to put myself in that environment. I grew up like that. I grew up with 3 languages. So every time I talked with my grandparents, for example, because they could only speak Finnish, then I had to naturally, you know, adapt. And I was in that environment and I just heard that language. And, you know, with friends, that was Swedish and so forth. So you just switch depending on the context. And that's also how I have continued, like in my adult years. Like that's how I want to learn. I have tried what you're saying, like sitting and learning, but that doesn't really, it doesn't make my brain spark enough in order to learn it, because it has to spark.
That's why it's the disciplines method. It's not interesting, it sucks. So
yeah.
I was just using it as a concentration exercise, like,
yeah.
oh, how can I sit in this pain and do it?
Yeah, that's pain. That's real pain. Yeah. But I mean, some of it is needed to then, you know, just to get started, because that's what the blasters do. They just gather this minimal amount of information, and then they put themselves out there, and then they try, and it's a lot of trial and error and refining going on all the time. And that's my way of learning.
Yeah, I've got a friend who I think is kind of like your type. And he also learned Korean around the same time as me, and he did not sit there with a book the same as me. He didn't improve as much. He's still pretty good though.
Yeah.
Definitely not bad. He would mostly just actually practice and ask people, and I don't know how he could possibly, like, it was just a very slow and steady improvement.
Yeah. It's just you're cracking the code. By being there, you are starting to see the patterns. It takes around, there is some research about that. It takes around 6 months to crack a language code. And then they say after 5 languages, if you've learned 5, then you will just increase the speed, because then you have, your brain is kind of used to seeing different patterns, and now it will find out the right answer sooner. Yeah.
After I learned Korean, when I learned Japanese was super easy.
Yeah, that's how it works. It seems like, because you are in New Zealand, so what languages are the most common to learn around there?
It's English. We're quite multicultural, so that's kind of interesting because
I mean, if you're learning not your native language, but what languages do you learn, like in school and so forth?
The options for me in high school were Japanese, German, French, and Te Reo, like Maori, like,
oh, cool.
You know, the native people.
Yeah,
we have the native people, they're called the Maori.
Yeah.
So it's interesting you brought it up, because recently in the last few years, the last prime minister that got voted in, she, like, her whole thing is like she's doing a big push to try to revive the Maori language. So these days it's like real easy to go and get free lessons from like a Maori teacher, or like you're starting to see it in TV more. Products are starting to change their names to like Maori names. If a company is like a government organization, they're being encouraged to use it at work. So I guess these days you could say that one as well. But when I was a kid, that wasn't really the case. Like, I still to this day, I don't really know anyone who's fluent in Maori. But I think it's going to become more prevalent here. I don't know when this stopped, but like for people older than me, if they spoke Maori in school, they'd get beaten. So like, it's like our government was trying to suppress their language. But now, because so obviously there's a lot of like backlash from the Maori people, we're trying to like bring it back.
Yeah, it's good.
There's interesting dynamics, because you get people like you get like the old boomer white people who are like really upset about it. They like don't want to like have to learn these words, like the same people who still are like against people being gay, for example. Like, they would see it on TV and be like, why are they shoving it in our face? And then like it's the same with the Maori, and I'm like, yeah, but you know, your generation was fucking beating them to kill out their language. Like, how would you feel if you were them? You know, like, of course you're gonna bring it back and shove it in your face. You know, like I would have done that. If I was gay and if I was Maori, I'd be shoving it in people's faces too. Like,
right. Yeah, so, all these unnecessary problems we have on our planet. Yeah.
So it's pretty laughable. I'm considering learning it, just as my next language.
Cool. Yeah, I'm still thinking about you and your friend, like your different approaches to learning the language.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, I had something to say about that. So
yeah. And before that, I'm also kind of, resonating what you're saying. Like, you say that he isn't maybe as good as you are. That's what I find in my life too. Like, if I have a friend that is more similar to your type, they will learn more. Like, they could become an interpreter, like for a profession or something. Like, really, they get really skilled. Yeah, but the thing is with me is that I get by. It's more that sort of learning, and I learn more over time, but slowly. But I'm not out to really learning for that, to that perfection, that level of perfection. It's more like the purpose is to be able to exist and live, and of course communicate about the interesting stuff as well, but it doesn't have to be, on a professional level. So I think that's also interesting to compare between you and your friend.
Yeah.
And you and me, yeah.
When I lock onto something, I'm not satisfied with just getting by. I have to become like a master at it. And so I'll make my whole schedule kind of obsessed with it. So I did at least 4 hours a day studying it. And so I improved really, really quickly because I knew like, oh, if I stop at like average level, there was no point learning the language. And so I just went all in on it. Whereas I see like my friend was the same as you. He's quite satisfied to just be like, no, slowly improve. And then
because you can still do a lot, like you can contribute to the tribe, you can still, you know, get a lot of joy from it, even when you do it on like a lower level or
but then you can't have a
level.
deep conversation. Like you can't talk about psychology, you can't talk about like how I calculated my macros for my nutrition and my workouts and stuff. Like,
yeah, I see what you're saying, and that's true. Like, for example, if it comes to tech terminology, I don't know that terminology even in my own language, and I will definitely not learn it like in some other language, but I can learn enough to, for example, have an interesting conversation about my favorite topics like psychology. So I learn the terminology for that type of conversation. So I can have a deep conversation in certain areas, but you know, whatever is in my box. It's very OI focused, like what is needed, like not the unnecessary.
yeah, I get you.
Yeah, and then if I need to learn more, like to do whatever, then I will have to address it then there and then, you know.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I wanted to know the whole thing for any situation. Yeah.
So interesting.
But also my complicated things. So so with I got this theory with the intuitives and the senses because I didn't just study language learning, I studied linguistics and stuff. And there's all these theories going around in the university that with language teaching, what you should do is have a classroom where, like, say I'm learning Korean, they should teach Korean in Korean. So like no English in the classroom.
Yeah.
And there's all these like theories and reasoning, and people have this research to show that it works. But whenever I tried classes like that, I just learned nothing. I'd go there and they'd say a bunch of stuff, and I'm just like, man, I never clue what you're saying. Like, I can't understand your instructions. You're explaining this word to me using words I don't understand.
Because you're not guessing as freely, maybe. Because
I was guessing wrong. Like,
the fun part is, yeah, but it is, you know, it's a guessing game. Like, that's what the intuitive mind loves. Like, I don't care if I'm wrong like 25 times in a row, as long as I can keep guessing, because the fun part is to guess. And finally, if I keep guessing like 100 times, finally I'll get it right.
Yeah, to me, that's a waste of time. What I do is like, I've got my own theory where I'm like, okay, when someone is intermediate level, like once they're past the beginner stage, then they can start doing the classes only in that target language, because they'll have some understanding of the instructions. But like, for me as a beginner, I was like, man, I'm just wasting my time here. I sat here for 3 classes. That's 3 hours I wasted. I learned nothing. Right. Now I've gone home. I've like 3 hours of my book. Man, I learned so much. Like, and then I can go out and use it instantly. So I think maybe the people who were in there able to pick everything up, maybe they're like NE or something. Maybe they're like just magically able to like understand what's going on. But I'm like, man, I don't understand what's going on. I'm totally lost. I'm just sitting here like an idiot. And then they'll get us to do these activities and someone's like blah 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 blah, and I'm just like
yeah.
So
I get it.
I think there's different methods for different types. Because I try to teach my method to people, and it's like, man, I can't sit there for that long and force myself to do it. I'm like, yeah, but you want to learn the language, right? So you got to put in some effort.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, because for me, even when I'm wrong, I'm still learning. It's like the process of elimination. So it's not this. So then I'm narrowing in and zoning in, and then I'm also learning steps on the way that is useful later. So it's not really wasting, because it's helping me to gather more patterns.
Yeah, I suppose if you're good at it, yeah.
That's how it works, like by default. So yeah, it's never a waste.
I can apply it to other areas, but I guess if I'm not certain I know what that word means, then I don't know, I'm just lost, totally lost.
Yeah, it's interesting how you do it differently depending on what savior functions you have. So when was it you were type, by the way? Is it a year now or a little less?
Yeah, it's actually almost been a year.
Almost a year, yeah. So how has your journey been like during this year? And in the end of this whole interview, I also want to ask you, would you have any advice to give your younger self? Like if you knew what you know now, what would you have done or thought or decided differently, or what kind of advice would you give someone with your type that hasn't been typed yet or is younger, something like that?
Yeah. What was the first question? Oh, something about processing type or something.
Yeah. Just the
Yeah.
journey, like the quick NI overview of the journey and connecting that then to the kind
Yeah.
of advice you would give to your younger self.
Yeah, I guess the whole, like, I didn't have any rejection of my type like some people have. I don't feel like I really had to process it. I kind of just felt like, oh, everything makes sense now. Like when I'm doing this, it's this function. When I'm doing this, it's that function. When I do that, it's that function. Not really much to say there. Like Demon FE, it's pretty obvious. Like people were telling me that my whole life. Like they're like, oh, dude, you're a bit crude. Like you're a bit like, you're not really like the way you could explain things. You could be a bit nicer, like blah, blah, blah. Yeah, pretty obvious, like no surprises. Certain, I mean, like I'd started exploring NF right before I got my type back. And then I sort of saw like, oh, wow, it was very ST. And then I started to entertain the NF things. Then I'll see other like STs in the server. You mentioned some NF things. They're kind of like rejecting it. I'm like, oh, you're still stuck. Oh, like, yeah. But you can't. I know that if someone presented it to me, like I probably still wouldn't have accepted it. So I'm not really sure how to like. I just leave them. I don't know. Not really much to say about that. Advice I'll give to my younger self would be go learn meditation really early, like as soon as possible. Make that the priority. Go to some Buddhist center and pay attention. And I know like if I did go to the Buddhist center at a young age, I would have found it interesting, because I had a friend who, like the guy I think is your type twin, would introduce NF things to me, and even though I thought it's bullshit, I still found it interesting. The way the stuff was presented in the Buddhist center, to me, like I know I would have clicked something and been like, oh, I see what I've got to do here. Like this makes a lot of sense. And so I will say, go do that. And then there's other random things like go learn martial arts, because I had this idea in my head, like, oh, I have to like lift weights and get as strong as possible before I learn martial arts, because then my skills will be better. But actually it's backwards. So I got that all backwards. That was wrong TI. That was
interesting. Yeah,
forget all that powerlifting shit. You're going to get injured, because I did. Now I've got all these injuries I've got to deal with. I should have just focused on like, this is like another thing. So, you know, the alpha video for TIs, it says you should like focus on the FI. So there's all these different martial arts, and there's some that are like objectively just better in reality, because like if you go to the UFC or whatever, you can see like certain martial arts are always the ones that are being used, and it's never the cool ones that I like. It's never like the Chinese ones where they have the cool flashy movements, but those are the ones I like the best. And because of that, I like never did any martial art, because I was like, well, I can't do the one that I like, and the one that I think is like actually the most effective, like I'm not as drawn to it. Like I don't think it looks as cool, so I'm like not. I just didn't learn anything like but now I know like, oh, if I'd done those cool like wushu things, I would have had like better flexibility. I wouldn't have gotten injured. I would have been able to do the cool movements. And then when I lift weights, my form and my structure would have been better, and I wouldn't have gotten injured. So like go learn wushu straight away. And yeah, that and meditation. And when other people have emotional reactions, don't be like, why are they having emotional reactions? I'm not reacting to that. Why are they reacting? Like that's just because you've got superpower to suppress it, and that's actually, you just got to pay it back later. It's just going to cause damage. So respect other people's emotions. Don't be too surprised that they're having a reaction. That's just like some coding difference. There's actually trauma there. They can't help but react.
Yeah, cool. Excellent advice. And yeah, I think we'll stop at that note. And I just want to say thank you for coming, and so early in the morning for you. I
Yeah, that's
appreciate
okay.
that. Mhm.
Cool,
Okay.
cool. Thanks for inviting me.
Okay.
Go and sleep process placebo.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have to rewatch the entire interview and sleep process a lot now. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Cool. See you later, eh?
Bye.